Hey there, I'm Krista Vance, entrepreneur and operations leader.
And I'm Matt Vance, award-winning author and social innovation researcher. We're your hosts of the Culture Profit Podcast.
Your place for purposeful company culture strategy.
Learn from HR pros, executives, and thought leaders how to prioritize profits by prioritizing people.
This episode is sponsored by Rum, the best friend of forward-thinking HR leaders, helping you strengthen your employer reputation as a reflection of your real culture.
Learn more at mobrium.com. Welcome to the Culture Profit Podcast. I'm your co-host, Matt Vance.
And I'm your co-host, Krista Vance. The Culture Profit is a podcast series obsessed with one question: how can culture drive greater profits? Today, we're talking about burnout and why time off matters with Rilee Buttars, the co-founder and CEO of Dónde, the fintech travel startup transforming PTO culture. With Dónde's end-to-end platform, employers provide their team members a simple and exciting way to maximize their time off. Better time off means better time on. Thanks for being here with us, Rilee.
Thank you so much. That was so fun to hear that from you guys. So happy to be here, and I love this topic. So this is great.
Okay, well, we just want to learn a little bit more about you. Rilee is a competitive problem-solving achiever who somehow convinces others to join the fray. Her first time abroad was to India, and it was incredible. Sure, she spent the first 2 days inside with culture shock, surviving on chips and Diet Coke, but working there changed her, and she left knowing her heart belonged everywhere else but home. She has spent the most time in Jordan and dreams of driving the desert highway to Wadi Rum and windows down, listening to the Eagles. Rilee, that is really cool. Rilee has a sociology MS, traveled the world evaluating nonprofits, and spent most of her career as a project manager. She's married to her co-founder, Tommy, and mom to Sparkly Blue.
And now Frida. That bio's a little old. I have another baby.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Oh, that's so funny hearing that bio because, I wrote it and it's referencing my Clifton strengths, right? And it's like, oh, you love to problem solve and you love, you're very ambitious and you want to achieve things. And so I think it's so funny. But I love how it kind of outlines, my experience with travel and working abroad, because I think it's so important and it's really defined who I am as an individual and leader, I guess.
That's awesome. And congrats on your new baby. You said her name was Frida?
Yeah, Frida. Yeah. So
how old is she?
She's 15 or so months, so 1 year old.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, she's a cutie. So lucky.
Yeah. So we want to talk a little bit more about your travel. We know you actually just barely got back from a trip, but what's the most, with all the traveling that you've done, what's the most memorable vacation you've had and why?
That's such a great question. And I tell this story a lot. So I always kind of go towards the India story because that was my first time abroad. And as you mentioned in the bio, it was quite a shock. But I think it's because I grew up in a small town in Idaho. And, I always wanted to be somewhere else. I felt like it was too small and it really couldn't contain me. And so when I was able to go to India, just like coming off of that plane, it completely changed my life in just that moment. I joke that it was really like Dorothy leaving Kansas and coming to Oz, where it was black and white and now it was Technicolor. It was transformative, and it was the sight, the colors, the smell, everything was so new. And I can still smell it today. I haven't been back to India since then, but it's like it overwhelmed me and it changed me. And so that one is very memorable, even though it's been since 2007, so a long time. I don't know. I think that experience was amazing, and I want everyone to be able to have that. And that's why I do what I do, is because I think that travel can change the world. It opens up our hearts. It makes us more empathetic and understanding. And it's important for us to interact with people that are different than us, and that we can learn to see them for who they are and what they offer the world and our place in it. So yeah, I love the power of travel and want to make it more accessible.
That's amazing. What a trip. And I'm sure it was shocking. And just having going from Idaho to there must have been like, that's just so different. And so it was probably so just immediately, wow, the world is so much bigger than where I grew up, you know? And I think having that experience is huge for anyone to just see that it's bigger than our own communities.
Agreed. I think that was exactly what it was, where you interact with people and immediately I felt like, oh my gosh, they're so much like me. And that's what's hard, is like when they look different or they've had a different upbringing, right? You think about the differences, but in those moments, all I could think about was the similarities. And when I travel, something that I've noticed, right, is that there are these universal languages where even though we're not speaking the same words, we are able to connect on things like music or hand gestures, or on the love of children, the love of family, the love of friends, or food, or soccer. I think, soccer is one of those great things. If you can't speak the language, you just play soccer and everyone's happy. And so I found that in my work abroad, I've never spoken the language. I've always had a translator. And I found that, there are so many wonderful things that are just human. And if we can tap into those, then we can connect with people. And I think that's the power of being able to be with them in person and to connect.
That's an amazing tip to our viewers. Anyone who's traveling, go look for the similarities. I mean, the differences are amazing too, but to find how you can connect with people from all over the world. I love that.
And speaking of like human to human connections, this podcast is all about how companies can be more profitable with people first strategies. So we want to help facilitate a conversation here about how employers can connect with their team members as well. So just kind of to set the stage for this next question, Rilee. So I've been a VP of company culture at a global corporation. I've also helped consult several different companies through company culture transformations and engagement surveys and everything tied to employee feedback. And it's interesting that every time so far to date, every single time that I've helped with an engagement survey, the two top themes that come out of employee feedback is pay, number one, and PTO, number two. And I think it's interesting that it's so consistent, but it's actually not that surprising because there's two currencies of value, right? Money and time. That's what people care for. That's why they're there for a job. And so the fact that you and your team at Dónde are innovating and providing a platform that helps companies do better with PTO for their people is huge. It's going to make such a big difference. And I'm sure you've already seen that. So with that kind of stage set up, I'd love to hear your perspective, Rilee, how you feel company culture drives greater profits.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective, because just a little tidbit on our start. That's why we started. We had a leader a friend come to me and say, every year I ask my employees what they want to do, what they want to accomplish. And they always say the same thing. I really want to go and travel here. I want to meet this person. I want to see my family, etc. He's like, it's always centered around these experiences and their time off. And then every year I would go back and I would say, well, did you accomplish it? What did you do? And most of them said no. And as a leader, I felt stuck because I knew that that's what they wanted, but I didn't have anything I couldn't impact it in any way. And so I think, just noticing how important that is to employees is critical. And to your question where you're saying, what is that connection between culture and profit? I think the first thing is recognizing that those are actually tied together, that if you build great culture, then you can have good profit. And then the answer to that isn't always obvious, because when we think of profitability and we think of productivity, we often think of production, or we think about input and effort. How many hours are we putting in? And therefore, how does that drive profitability? And I think what's important is that we've now created culture and structures that support that notion. Okay, so let's work 9 to 5, let's work overtime. How do I pay you for overtime? How do I pay you for those hours that you clock in and clock out? Right, we have this entire culture of the time that we spend at work. But what's important is that then led to a culture of overwork. And that's the norm in the workplace, where we treat workaholics like heroes. And we've got, now campuses or these offices where we've got food and we've got gyms And we essentially created this incentive to stay at work. Everything is here. All you have to do is work and kind of create that, I guess, ability to never leave. And then we also now have this idea of it's about the performance of work. I loved this phrase when I read it, where it was like, yeah, we perform work. It's about how many emails did I send? How many Slacks did I send? And it's not really about the quality of that, but it was the quantity. How many hours am I spending and what am I doing with those hours? And then the last thing I've noticed is that when we've got the hybrid work environment, right, we have these tools that we adopted that enable us to work anywhere and anytime. So we can Slack at any time. We can write emails at any time. I can work in, my project management system at any time. And what that did is it essentially turned work into this flood that soaks our entire life. That's a quote from one of my favorite academics that studies this. And what happened with that flood taking over our life essentially is that we became burned out. We had so much stress and work never ended. And so the boundaries between work and home and time off and time on blurred. And all of a sudden we've got this mass amount of people that are experiencing burnout. And that has led to less productivity, less engagement, higher rates of depression, higher rates of people leaving the office. And all of this is happening. We're asking ourselves, why? Why is this happening? But it really is easy to understand if we trace that back into what we value as a company. We value work and the amount of hours that you spend. And so I think for a business, it's understanding that connection between the culture and the structure that we build and how that ties to profitability and productivity and the factors that lead to that, whether they support it or whether they detract from it.
Man,
Yeah, that was a lot, but
that's quite the response of, seeing this flood and domino effect of work just kind of taking over everything. And it also kind of feels like from what you're saying, measuring the wrong performance indicators based on time and tallies of things instead of the objective impact that work inputs have on results. So that's definitely intriguing.
And we wonder why we're seeing so many mental health challenges, right, at this time, where that is the culture of most companies, right?
Oh, totally. And I think like what you said at the beginning, right, there's these two currencies of what you're paid and then your time. And I think that that's very sacred to the employee, right? And when we come to work, we have these expectations of, okay, how much time is expected of me, and then how can I make sure that I do my best work within that time? But then when we've blurred those boundaries, then it just becomes overwhelming, and we're not able to kind of pace our lives and our health around that. So I think it's really interesting what we look at in terms of culture and where we're at today, the stats that we're seeing around burnout and depression and mental wellness or lack of mental wellness, as well as, just how that's impacting productivity and turnover.
Yeah, I think you're right on. And I also think the way that we work as leaders sends a message. Like when we send that email at, 12:07 p.m. or
AM,
in the middle of the night or, super early, like what's the accompanying message that's tacked on to whatever the subject line is? It's reinforcing those behaviors. And I think leaders have to very purposefully showcase the type of balance that is going to be healthier. And we have research to inform what those boundaries should be. But just kind of continuing this conversation, Rilee, I know you have a wealth of research around PTO, and obviously there's a direct connection to using PTO and minimizing burnout and producing better work, higher quality work when you are at work. How much PTO is getting unused in America, and what's the impact?
Yeah, so one of the latest studies done across the US is that it reported that there was about 768 million days left. So, inching towards that trillion mark. And what's interesting is, okay, so we've got a lot of days left on the table. And what does that actually mean for the company? So I guess the last thing was 65 billion in lost benefits to the employee. So that's how it impacts the employee. Like they're losing out by not taking those days. And then that was over 200 billion in company liability, because many companies actually have to pay out their employees for not taking those days off. So if an employee leaves some days on the table because the culture doesn't support it, or they weren't able to, they were too overworked, etc., then the companies often have to pay out. They say, oh, you didn't take that day, then I owe you X days, because it's actually contracted with the employee that they are able to take that day. So many companies have that, and that's a huge budget item for the company. So I'm really interested in that, and actually how we give the employee the days off and reduce the liability of the company. That would seem to be the most, I guess, the smartest thing to do as a business, but still, it's quite crazy. The other stat that I wanted to share was that in terms of unused days, so 2019, before the pandemic, it was that 29% of the total allocated days were left on the table. So if I have, about, I guess, 10 days, then I was leaving 29% of those days unused. I wasn't taking them. But then post-pandemic, so in 2022, that number rose to 55%. So that means there were more days not taken than were taken. And that's so interesting because, post-pandemic, right, we felt that burden. A lot of us came out even more burned out than we were, and more stressed, right? And now it's like, okay, we're blurring those lines even further. We now might work remote. And I think that that's really telling about what kind of culture we have today, where our people don't feel like they have the permission or the ability to take the days that are allotted to them. And this is a bad recipe for business. If there, are more days that are even given post-pandemic and less that are taken, then that's going to impact not only the cost to the company in terms of their liability, but also in lost productivity, but then how it impacts the employee and their mental health and their ability to show up and be really productive. And so I think as a business, we need to think about that connection between the days that they take off and their ability to work when they're actually on the clock, and noticing that and taking meaningful gestures and meaningful action towards changing that culture.
And yeah, that is a lot of data and information. I'm honestly shocked to hear that it's up to 55% of PTO days not used post-pandemic. Like, I'm sure you've heard the term, what is it, revenge travel? Like, everyone wants to go out there and travel. It feels like that's not really aligning and with the data, and that everyone's revenge working, even though they were working straight through the pandemic.
That's so interesting you say that, because as a travel company, right, we measure both what's happening in the travel world, but also what's happening in the HR realm. And you're right, there are less days being taken, but people are traveling like crazy. I just got back from, so London, Paris, and then I was in Italy, and most of these were for work. So I don't just travel for fun, but I was there for work. And so these are like the cities that are most traveled, and there are so many people there. Travel is on the rise for certain. It is very healthy. But then you have on the other side companies, right? And so I think we need to look at, how is it impacting the US work environment, right? So these cities might be more visited by Europeans or those that are living closer to those destinations. And in the US, that's not really happening, because the stats I report are more among the American workforce, not those elsewhere. But then also travel has changed a lot. How people take time off has changed because they don't have the money to travel. The prices are increasing year over year. Now it's up 40% than what it was. It's outpacing inflation. And so it's really expensive to travel. And so what people are doing is they're taking less days and they're going on closer trips. They're taking, more camping, more road trips, more 4-day weekends, etc. And while that is great, I love that. I definitely support it. It really helps. But there is a lot of research and shows about how to take your time off, what will enable you to really reduce your burnout, to lower your stress levels, and be able to return better. And so we can, jump into that as well. But I just think it is really interesting noticing the trends that are happening both in travel, but then also in the workplace, and how that impacts employees.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, that does lead us to the next question we had for you, which is focusing on those who are listening that are employees. what would be your recommendation of how they can get the most out of their vacation time off and also minimize the burnout? And maybe it has to do somewhat with how they take that vacation time, right?
Yeah. So one, it's just important to take time off. So I think, if that's just the base level, like take it off. But then if you want to talk about how to optimize it, there are a couple things. So first is the length. While 4-day work weekends are great and they're an awesome way to get out and to camp or to ski or something, you do want to at least take a good long vacation a year. So the optimal length is about 8 days. And the study shows that that gives you enough time to travel. So like if you're going international or you're going across the country or something, it allows you to travel to that location and to start decompressing. So you're able to get there and then have like a day or so where you're just kind of chill, or you're jumping in and you're, fully immersing yourself, but at least you've got that time to arrive. Then you've got a couple days where you're fully in the moment. You have like completely disconnected from your computer and you're there and you're enjoying the time. And then it also allows you to travel back. So they say 8 days is about the optimal time for a vacation. And this doesn't need to be every day that you take off. I think what we try to suggest is like one good vacation a year where you've got that 8-day vacation, you're fully disconnecting, you're going somewhere new, or you're going somewhere that helps you relax and to achieve the results that you want. So that was the one thing. The other thing are some of the aspects that go into how you pay for vacation, how you afford it, and then what you're doing with your relationship with work. So the 4 things that really are important for a good vacation or time off is it needs to be debt-free. So we all know that finances are one of the things that cause the most stress in anything, in relationship, in your personal life, etc. And so if you're traveling, it's not going to be beneficial if you're putting it onto debt. If you're putting it on a credit card and now having to stretch and pay that over a certain amount of time, right? You're gaining the interest. You're eventually going to pay more for that trip. And that's good. That's not good for anyone. So it needs to be debt-free. And the way to do that is one, to save, and then there's a lot of tips and tricks that I could give in this realm, but I just think the first and foremost thing is to think about the cost of travel and how you're going to actually afford it, where you're going, when to book, what to do, etc. Always plan ahead. It is a myth that says that you can find best rates last minute. Yes, sometimes that can happen, but most often it doesn't. And in the end, you'll pay for more. So if you want to talk more about affording travel, I've got lots of thoughts there. The second thing is it needs to be far away, meaning that I think there's actual calculation of the miles, but we just said far away. Because let's think about, okay, if you take time off and you just go to a doctor's appointment, or say you use that time to go and run around with your kids doing errands here and there, or maybe you do just a DIY project. Well, that is nice. That is not going to solve your stress. That is not going to reduce burnout. Far away allows you to fully disconnect from your everyday life. And this is important because the tasks and the responsibilities that you have in your everyday actually add stress to you. And sometimes that's good stress for sure, and we need to do it. But when you're able to fully go somewhere where it's new, or say it's not new, but it's familiar, and you're able to settle into that really helps the psyche. And so getting away from your everyday to the things that you don't see every day is really important for you, just to create that full separation, to create space for your brain and for your heart and for your mentality to just let go. The other thing is disconnect. You cannot be checking work on a regular basis in order to fully disconnect from that stress and that everyday life. So you do need to disconnect. Some people will say, I like checking my email. I like just staying in the know. And I think that that's okay too. It's not like a strict no talking, no Slacks, no emails, but it does need to feel like a break. This is the point of taking time off. It's to feel like a break. And so you need to figure that out. Maybe it's just you check Slack and email for an hour on the vacation every day or whatever. Figure out what works for you, but you do need to disconnect. And then stress-free. That means you need to plan it. You need to know what you're doing. You need to think about security. You need to think about, okay, what are the finances? How do I map that out? How do I budget for it? Who am I meeting? If you're going somewhere new, what's the routes that you need to take, right? There does need to be some time spent on what you are doing, where you are going, and with who, so that you feel a little bit better about the logistics so that you can let go. So those are just some of the things that I think are the tips and tricks that we talk about. And I think that if you can kind of involve that and address them, then you'll feel better as you disconnect from work and go on a vacation.
Yeah, and I think a once a year frequency is enough. It's often enough that you have something to look forward to. And in the Happiness Advantage, a book that I read, that was one of the top things that contributes to happiness is just having something to look forward to. And I think that often once a year, that 8-day vacation, and it's also not too often that it's a burden to plan for that, save for it, all the logistics with it. So I think that's a great rule of thumb.
Totally. There was a study that came out of, oh no, I'm going to mess it up. Netherlands, I think, where they looked at the benefits of vacation, and they said, yes, point blank, taking a vacation is beneficial. But there are a couple of things that, need to be kind of part of it in order for that to be fully optimized. And those some of the things that I mentioned before. But one of them is they found also that the value of looking forward to the vacation is almost as valuable as actually experiencing it. Because there was a study also that I looked at last week where it talked about how much you daydream about your next trip. And actually that does create that serotonin. It creates that good vibe where it's just like, I'm thinking about me being there. And that's having an impact today. I don't actually have to be in the place to start feeling the benefits. So yes, if you're in that planning mode, if you've got something to look forward to, that can help with burnout.
Completely agree. Yeah, and so that I think this is a good touch point on, what are employees feeling and how can they get the most out of their vacation time off. And then earlier you mentioned that, limiting liabilities for companies and also reducing burnout for their employees who are the business, that can happen less, or we can reduce it if we have a focus on a culture that supports that paid time off, that vacation time off. So how can they do that? How, in an effective way, how can they encourage employees to use all their PTO? And do you have any favorite companies that champion time off?
Great question. Love that. I will talk about our customers all day long. I think the first thing is that as a company, you need to realize that this is the deal that you brokered with your employee. When they took that job, when you talked about PTO, this is what they expect. This is not something that you do only as a recruitment tactic. This is how they will experience your company. This is not fluff. It is not a nice to have. PTO is something that everybody wants. It matters to everybody, and how you handle it will directly impact how they do their work, but also how they think about your company. So I think that's just the first thing, is that they will expect to take those days off. And when you don't let them, then you've now broken your promise. And that is something that as a business, as a leader, you can absolutely take charge of. You can do better and then, fulfill that promise. So the other thing is just that I think it's an opportunity to be taken advantage of. There was this quote by SHRM, one of the big associations among HR leaders. And they said that, PTO is one of the things that is fully not taken advantage of. It has so much potential, and it is at the company's power to do that. This is a tool to create the culture that you want, to create the productivity and profitability that you want. So use it, tap into it, and fully take advantage of it. And then as for that, some of the companies that we work with, we have so many great leaders in the Utah ecosystem. And I was thinking about, who to mention. And there's just a couple. So there's one called Job Nimbus. They're here local, and they're amazing. They've really focused on experiences and enabling that for their employees. So they give a bonus into Dónde every year, and they have high adoption among our platform. But what I love most about it is that they announce it every year at a big all hands meeting. And they're usually somewhere really fun when they do it. So they're not only talking about the future and the upcoming year and where their employees can go, but they're also fully living it. They're experiencing something together. They're announcing the Dónde benefit, and they fully just live that ideal. And then we also have Crumble. They do a very similar thing where they give their employees a bonus into Dónde to help offset the cost of travel and to fully experience it. But what I love is that they announce it during Memorial Weekend. So this is the kickoff of the summer, right? They're saying, okay, we just had, a really tough winter. We've been working really hard. And now is the time for you to go and experience things with your family and friends. And so they literally give them the money just as we're about to kick off into this season of holidays and experiences. And so I think they send a really clear message that, like, we want you to get out. We want you to have these experiences. Here you go. So I love that. And then another one of our companies, Traeger, they're this really important brand, and people love what they can do with their Traeger, right? People kind of gather around it. They have these beautiful meals, and they've created this culture that is really centered on that, what they do with the Traeger and how it brings people together. And so when they offer Dónde, they do a match. This is something where the employee can put money in and the company matches that. And that's really cool because they're helping their employees save, and they're part of that story. They're saying, hey, we want you to be able to do this. If you put a little bit in, we'll put a little in, and together we'll work up towards that vacation. So I love that structure. We also have a company called Lendio that does that as well. And then one other company is a school. It's a private school. And, teachers are really burned out. They give so much to those students. And, they are in really hard circumstances. And so I think where this school, they are really standing out is that they acknowledge that. They're like, our teachers deserve more. We want to give them more. And so they give a sizable bonus into the Dónde account for these teachers. And I love that because it's a underserved population of people that are so incredibly important in our ecosystem, and they deserve more. So yeah, those are just some of the companies that we work with that really prioritize and communicate to their employees that they care.
I love that, being an advocate for teachers. That makes that they definitely deserve it, and we all do. We all need a break, from our daily responsibilities and from work. And I think you're a huge advocate for this, and it says it with the business that you've started, helping reduce burnout and helping companies know what's their motivation behind supporting this movement of helping their employees have less burnout, helping their employees get away, and ultimately be more productive for their own companies. So thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for your tips on maximizing your vacation and using it to the best of the time off you have, for those who are listening that are employees. And thanks for all the motivating stats and research behind helping our companies drive a better culture towards this. It was so great having you today, Rilee. Thank you for your time, and we hope all our listeners enjoy.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love this podcast, so happy to be a part of it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Culture Profit Podcast, and for being a part of our journey to prove that putting people first is best for business.
Today's episode was sponsored by Mowbray.
Want to get more employee reviews and streamline your employer reputation? Visit mowbray.com.
Now go find one way to prioritize your people and watch your profits grow.